We are back here at PitchMark celebrating World IP Day. It's the day when innovators and their clients pay special attention to the intellectual property and the value that they add. In the Philippines, where many of our PitchMark members are based, they're not just celebrating World IP Day, they've made a whole month worth of celebrations and raising awareness for this very important issue. The theme for World IP Day this year is IP and the Sustainable Development Goals, and ensuring that innovation and creativity helps to solve the world's problems. I'm joined from Bangkok by PitchMark Legal Counsel, Frank Rittman. Welcome, Frank. And our special guest on the show today is the Director General of the Intellectual Property Office in the Philippines, IPOPHIL. He is Mr. Rowel Barber. Thank you so much for joining us, Rowel.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to reach out to our innovators and creators all over the world.
Clearly, in the Philippines actually has many creatives. We've seen so many of our members join from the Philippines, which goes to show just how important they see this as an issue. Can you give us a snapshot for those of us not based in the Philippines as to the current state of intellectual property protection?
Well, I'm currently here in Tagaytay City to attend the planning session of our National Committee on Intellectual Property Rights. No? And this is just part of the many events we're holding for the National Intellectual Property Month. Because in 2017, our former president declared April, the whole month of April, as National IP Month. So, it's just one of those activities. So we started so many activities already. In fact, I just arrived from Mindanao yesterday for another event, the BIP Masterclass, and also a mandatory continuing legal education for lawyers and even non-lawyers in the city of Cagayan de Oro. So we continue to work with the different government agencies. In fact, we are also part of the National Innovation Council, and we're proud to say that IPOPHIL is the only non-national government agency part of that council. And that council is headed by no less than the President of the Republic of the Philippines. And we're also part of the Philippine Creative Development Council. So we are among the 17 members of the council, which was just created just this year.
So the United Nations in this year's theme is obviously very keen to link intellectual property with sustainability. Do you see a similar link, and are there specific examples in the Philippines where companies are perhaps contributing in the fight against global warming? Perhaps they are coming up with new innovations and new inventions to reduce carbon in the atmosphere, let's say.
Yes, for us at the Intellectual Property of the Philippines, it is critical that we understand how intellectual property heavily intersects global well-being. No? The Philippines in particular is prone to extreme climate changes. We have, on a yearly basis, we have 20 typhoons and we have extreme drought. So these extreme weather changes or challenges affect the health of our population, the Filipinos, agriculture, ecosystems, and even infrastructure. So in our case, for IPOPHIL, we really deem it necessary to provide protection, especially to special innovations on these green technologies and sustainable development. So we all know that patents provide protection to new innovations, new technologies, new processes, and we have to, our work is really count out for us. No? So we have, in fact, started way back in 2022, in the midst of the pandemic, our socially relevant technologies contest. No? This is open to collegiate students and even professional. No? And since then, we had the first, if I'm not mistaken, the first one in 2020 was about water, how we conserve water. Second was sustainable packaging. And I think last year was about waste management. So hopefully we'll be able to continue this and make it even bigger, so we can put strategies in place that contribute to climate priorities. No? So in addition, we plan to put up a green technology incentive program. Hopefully we can launch it this year. So we will be able to provide incentives to our creators, to our inventors, on sustainable change adaptation, alternative energy, wastewater management, and even solid waste management. No? So we plan to give incentives uh, to eligible applicants, because we are a developing country, and we know that the biggest problem of our creators and even inventors is financials. So we want to assist them by giving them free filing fees and even first publication fee.
Would you say that the old adage that necessity is the mother of invention counts particularly strongly in, as you say, a developing country where these changes in the climate are more acutely felt?
Yes, I believe in that saying. And I think it is, which that saying moves us to do more for our Filipinos, especially in the subject of climate change.
Now, here at PitchMark, we are particularly passionate about small companies, perhaps freelancers, individuals who develop pitches for very large prospective customers. But we're also acutely aware that because of their reduced market power, sometimes they just get taken advantage of. It seems like virtually anybody you talk to anywhere in the world, if they're in the creative industry, they have an example of where an idea that they've pitched was declined only for that prospective customer to take up the idea themselves without any recourse to the individual. So from our perspective at PitchMark, we see this very much as a sustainability issue, but more on the social and governance front. Could you maybe give some insights as to where you see this situation in the Philippines?
Well, based on our interactions with the different groups, when I started as Director General in 2020, yes, I noticed that most of our creatives, our inventors, our innovators, they do not know their rights under the law. And they also don't know about their obligations. And so that's why we embarked on an intensive IP awareness program, going around the country and talking to the different groups and explaining what intellectual property is and what are their rights under the law, especially our creatives. We noticed that they do not know anything about their rights. They just want to create without uh, thinking about how they will be able to to commercialize their work and give receive something from their work. So that's but I think after 4 years, here we are, and I think the level of awareness has improved, not tremendously, but we still have a big work to do, especially for the students who are prone to piracy nowadays, because we had a survey together with the WIPO, and the survey showed that those 13 and below, which is the youngest in the among those uh, part of the survey, they're more prone to piracy. One, it's for free. Second, their peers do it anyway. So we really want to educate, especially our youth. That's why we just released, also together with the WIPO, a video uh, promoting the respect of IP. So our one actor, Matteo Guidicelli, was kind enough to be part of that promotions, and hopefully we'll be able to reach out to more Filipinos, especially the young ones, and at least make an improvement on how they see intellectual property, and improve the total picture in the Philippines.
Frank, come on in on this.
Well, I'm recalling with respect to IP awareness, back in my days with the Motion Picture Association, we put a lot of emphasis on this very same thing. And there was a time that we had a big concern with camcording, people taking movie theaters into theaters and recording the film. And we had a series of trailers that we put out, public service announcements around the world discouraging that. And we encouraged all our film communities around the world to come up with their own messages that might resonate a little bit better. And I'm recalling in particular the one that out of the Philippines was very, very humorous and very cute. I wish I had it at hand and I could show it to you guys, but it's an absolutely great little 30-second video that leaves everybody aware. It drives home the message. It does it with a little bit of humor. It doesn't shake your fingers at people. It makes you feel good about what you're doing. And I think the Philippines has always been so good at that. So I want to echo your observations, Mark, about the creativity and just the feeling of joy that you often get out of the Philippines.
Yes. Do you remember the name of that artist? No.
No, I don't. It's a gentleman. He's sitting in the theater, and the two ushers come up, and they find a series of cameras. One's in his ballpoint pen, one's in his eyeglasses, one's in his filling in his tooth. I'll send it to you, though. You'll really enjoy it.
Yes, thank you for that. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, we're one of the first countries to pass an anti-camcording bill.
Yeah, I worked very closely at the time with the Philippine government representatives on that very issue, and we were very pleased about that. It was a big problem down there, of course.
Yes,
Well-
in fact, we also just got an award from the MPA just recently for our voluntary site blocking rules.
Congratulations. Well deserved.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, which is the first in Asia and only the second in the world after Germany.
Well
Awesome.
deserved.
Yeah, well deserved. Well, I mean, I guess everybody needs to be in on this conversation, right? And it's not just the big end of town, the large companies that are filing patents and registering for trademarks. You mentioned, Rowel, that it's also the little design shop or the gig economy, the freelancers who need to know their rights. But what is it like on the receiving end? You know, for those large multinational companies, large Filipino conglomerates, how do you rate the awareness there of the need to respect the IP rights of their freelance vendors?
Well, we still have a lot to do in that respect. I think there were several moves to protect, especially the those in the gig economy and those not in permanent positions in some sectors like the movie industry. In fact, there's a pending bill in Congress right now to protect their rights as employees. It was an offshoot of the Eddie Garcia incident, so that they'll be able to give protection also to them as workers and employees. But
Could you just elaborate briefly on the Eddie Garcia incident? What happened?
yes, he tripped. He's one of the famous actors in the Philippines, and he tripped in one shooting, and that was the cause of his death. So with that incident, there was a clamor for more protection for those people involved in the production of movies. They're including the time they're allowed to work and allowed to take a rest, and I think also some compensatory items that will be included in their contracts. So it's still pending in both houses here in the Philippines. So for big companies, I think there's also a push for ESG here in the Philippines, and in fact, some of the banks are already giving priority to ESG projects of some companies. And well, I think we're making some improvements in that respect, but we still have to do a lot more, especially in respecting the rights of creators, innovators. I think we can do some more improvements, no? Especially for the benefit of those in the gig economy. And I would just like to add that I just forgot it earlier, that we also made sure that in our new office will be a LEED certified office and a green one. So we'll be transferring to a new office within the year, and we'll make sure that we will also abide with the ESG requirements. And one on the part of governance, we are also pursuing the performance governance system. And in fact, we got the Silver Trailblazer Award in 2022, and we are pursuing the last stage this year before my term ends in December. This is patterned after the balanced scorecard of the Harvard Business School. So it's a voluntary one, and the aim really is to improve on governance for our stakeholders.
Frank, did you want to jump in again?
No, that sounds very impressive. You guys just sound incredibly busy, all that you're doing.
Yes,
so many
actually,
activities this month.
I was going to say, looking at your website, Rowel, it's remarkable actually how many activities you have going on. The number of announcements that you have on your presence is quite extraordinary. There was one news announcement though that I did pick up, and that is the amount of counterfeits seized in 2023, a record high of 27 billion pesos. What do you put it down to that, on the one hand, Filipinos expect their IP to be respected, yet on the other hand, it seems they're quite happy to purchase counterfeit items?
Well, it's a sad part, but I think we're improving in that respect. We have been having programs together with those identified as in the watch list in the marketplace. So we continue to work with the different LGUs also, and the different government agencies, the Philippine National Police, the National Bureau of Investigation. So we'll be able to really eliminate counterfeiting and piracy. In fact, that's in our vision of the National Committee on Intellectual Property Rights. But one counterpart in Korea asked me, is that really possible to eliminate? According to them, maybe we can reduce it, but it's really difficult job to eliminate. No, we really have to work together, to partner with the different countries, especially in the ASEAN region, and also the different organizations like the MPA. So
Yes.
hopefully we'll be reducing the counterfeits here in the Philippines. Because here in the Philippines, there are no manufacturers of counterfeits, or I think it's less. No? It's really a problem of some countries dumping here in the Philippines their counterfeits.
Well, to borrow a phrase from the environmental protection industry, when the buying stops, the killing can too. Would the same thing apply to counterfeits? When the buying of rip-off handbags, for example, stops, then the piracy will stop too.
Yes, we believe in that. In fact, some sectors involved in the sale of counterfeits, we try to talk to them and tell them to promote local products instead, and not engage in such illicit activities. So, well, I think we're improving. We're moving there little by little, because according to my former deputy director general, who's already, I think, is 65. According to him, when I started practice of law way back, Green Hills, or one of those identified under the watch list of the USTR, was already there. Several raids were conducted. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, some were violent, but it has not disappeared. There's a problem. In fact, it is also part of the itinerary of some foreigners. That's which is lamentable. Not only the locals, but more for the foreigners. So we told the tourism department that we should not be able to promote those kind of destinations here in the Philippines.
Yes. Frank.
Bob, I was just curious about the Gawang Yamang Isip Award, which is also part of your NIMP activities. And I'm wondering if that has to do with enforcement, or is it about creativity? What exactly is it?
Well, that's the our culminating event for the National Intellectual Property Month. And here we recognize Filipino inventors, creators, and entrepreneurs who have shown exemplary talent and ingenuity towards national progress through intellectual property. For our enforcement team, we also give them citations. No? They'll be part of that awards night. And I'm proud to say that we have been increasing seizures every year. Prior to the 26.9 in 2023, I think the last record high was in 2021 of about 24.5 billion pesos. No? So they were with me earlier today, the team, the National Committee on Intellectual Property Rights, and I told them that we should be able to break the record every year. So I hope that will be sufficient incentive for them.
Generally speaking, what's being seized on the streets these days? Is it fashion apparel? Is it trademark? I mean, in my old days, 15 years ago, it was pirated DVDs, but nobody really collects pieces of plastic anymore.
No more DVDs. It's still the counterfeit apparels, mostly apparels, and also
handbags and whatnot, scarves.
Yes, in fact, 2 years ago, I was a witness to see counterfeits in a 7-story building, from foot apparels to lotions to shampoo, in fact, some medicines. And it was good that our Bureau of Customs was able to seize those
yes.
items.
Well, returning to the creative industries and again, the sort of members of PitchMark who, as I said earlier, might be putting together a creative pitch, an advertising campaign, or perhaps they're a copywriting agency and they're putting forward some written work. You know, often these are very small players. When they go in to pitch their ideas to multinationals or very large Filipino companies, you know, the market power really is with the much larger player. Talk us through what your suggestions or recommendations are for those freelancers and so on, who on the one hand certainly want to do the pitch, they want to get the business, and if the business is then, you know, if the idea is stolen from them, they're not necessarily going to report it to somebody. They're not necessarily going to look for some sort of enforcement, because after all, they're risking working together with this company at some point in the future. What are your thoughts on situations like that?
Yes, in our sessions with the different sectors in the Philippines, we have always emphasized that intellectual property protection or registration should be part of their business strategy. So from the first instance, they should be able to record their copyright with us. It's a very easy. They can just email their applications. And for trademarks and the other industrial properties, they can just, we have, I'm proud to say that we have an online system. I think we are the only ones in the government, no, right now, which is almost 90% online, from application to payment to the issuance of the certificate. So so before pitching or before announcing their work outside, so we suggest to them that make sure that you have protection already from the Intellectual Property Office of the Philippines, so that your creations will not be uh, uh, copied by anyone else.
And has this had a palpable impact on the propensity of recipients of IP to just make off with the idea?
Yes, in fact, last year was also record-breaking high in terms of filings here in the Philippines. So from 48,000, we increased to about, there was a 2.5 increase in terms of the industrial property. But for copyright, it was, if I'm not mistaken, a 26 or 30% increase in the recordation. Even if we adhere to the principle that creation or copyright exists from the moment of creation, we also encourage them to file so that they have a proof that such is their creation. So we're telling them it's just like a birth certificate to prove that that work is yours and you are the creator of that particular work.
Well, many innovators, before I allow Franco to come back in, many innovators might see this as an insurance policy, but as we know, often innovators might say, well, it's just a brief pitch. I'm not now going to necessarily buy out or take out this insurance. What could possibly go wrong? And then, of course, when things do go wrong, then they're left high and dry, aren't they?
Yes. In fact, one, it's a youth. She's a young inventor. In fact, while she's working on particular process or product, she joined the contest. Then suddenly, there were already companies manufacturing the fryer system, which was her invention. So right now, she learned her lesson. So before talking to possible financiers and to commercialize her work, she made it. She made sure that such work is registered with us.
Well, I think a while ago you mentioned the fact that you're incentivizing the registrations by in some ways waiving the fees or reducing the costs. And I think that's great because I think a lot of young creators, as you said, don't have an awareness of what's involved. They might be put off by what they perceive as the formality and the expense. Too often governments see, the registration process as a way to make money. But if your larger goal is to, build an infrastructure for respecting IP rights and creativity, maybe, by making the fees a little bit more affordable and waiving them where necessary, you're contributing to the greater good. So I congratulate you on that as well.
Thank you. While
Making IP much more of a friendly, user-friendly concept.
while we are a self-sustaining agency, it means that we do not get any single centavo from the national government. We make it a point to also share what, well, based on our income, whatever we can share for our undeserved and underrepresented sectors of society, like women. We have so many programs for women. We have the Wanna Make a Mark for trademark protection. We started this in 2017, and we already gave out about 6,000 to women-led enterprises. And we're adding additional 1,000, I think, this year, so that they'll be able to protect or trademark their products. We also have the Wanna patent and Wanna invent. Because here in the Philippines, we call women Wanna. So that's why we call those programs Wanna. Wanna patent and Wanna design. It was an offshoot of our engagement with the youth, and also to incentivize women to register their works, their patents, and in design. In fact, that was I think we launched it in 2022, and in the same year, the Philippines was, according to WIPO, was the second women inventors through the PCT, the Patent Cooperation Treaty, at 38%. So we continue to incentivize our underserved. We also have the youth IP incentive program, because we realize that these students, they do not have money to file for registration. So and based on the exchanges with them, they really need the support government can give to them, no? And hopefully this year also we'll be able to issue the rules and regulations on green technologies, to incentivize our inventors, our creators, on anything about to solve the climate change problems, and on the sustainable development goals.
Finally, how big is or how important is the leap to not only defend IP rights, but to actively promote the IP for commercialization?
Well, currently I am the chair of the APEC IP Experts Rights Group. And it appears that IP commercialization is not only a problem in the Philippines, but also in the region. So, there's really a need to push IP commercialization in all the different sectors, in all the different countries in the world. Just, I told DG Darren of the WIPO, DG Darren, we have been bragging that IP is it's a personal right. It's a right, but unfortunately, no banks will accept or does not want to. They don't want to accept IP as collateral. So how can we solve this problem?
You raise a really interesting point. The WIPO has kicked off a big program on what they call intangible asset financing. And this very recognition that a lot of companies, young people, don't have factories or equipment. They've got an idea, they've got a trade secret, they're halfway in a discussion with a gaming company. And you're right, there is an awareness that banks around the world don't have a lot of familiarity with this. Some small pockets of expertise in, say, New York and London, but you're right, here in Asia, there's a huge need for it. So that is something that the WIPO is going to be pushing, and I'm glad you guys are at the forefront of that as well.
Yes, in fact, Singapore shared that I think they started one, but unfortunately, nothing happened. But based on the sharings in the IPEG, it appears that Korea and Canada, I think they're making some improvements, and hope that we'll be able to copy that model.
Yeah, China's coming out with a report soon as well. But yeah, to your point, anytime Darren does something, Singapore's right there because, of course, he came out of Singapore. But they were the first in, but then they sort of petered off. And I would say maybe between, say, south of China all the way down to Australia, there's not much awareness about this right now.
And it would be a big thing, especially here in the Philippines.
Yeah.
It's a developing country, so we really need the financial support for everyone, especially our inventors, creators. So,
Well, And it gets back to what Mark was saying before. In order to really create the infrastructure for financing, you have to also have an infrastructure for respecting and sustainability of IP itself. So the banks are going to come in when they're comfortable that the companies have their acts together and that there's a sufficient degree of creativity, and they want to insert themselves into all that.
So hope that we can make some strides for IP financing and IP commercialization.
Indeed. That brings us to the end of my questions. Frank, do you have any others?
No, just kind of curious about artificial intelligence. I didn't want to keep us on too long, but I mean, that's something that governments around the world are grappling with as well, in terms of sustaining IP and whether, ChatGPT is going to dispense or dispose of lawyers and whether we need anything like that anymore. Is there anything that we should know about the Philippines?
Well, here in the Philippines, we're working with other government IP offices in the world and also the WIPO, especially on the updates. Our Department of Trade and Industry is also spearheading the discussions on the IP AI policy of the Philippines and whether it will be regulated or not. So I think we just have to observe what's happening in the other jurisdiction, more advanced, like the US, the UK, the EU. So
Are you seeing it being embraced, or people, just in your sense, are people using it? Are you hearing a lot of sound-alike recordings or, suspicious photographs or something? You're right, it is coming out more and more. I'm just wondering if you're getting a sense of it in the Philippines.
well, here in the Philippines, yes, we can see some works, especially on the use of deepfakes, and but let's see in the coming elections. This might be used.
Always a colorful time in the Philippines.
Yeah. Great.
That's it for me, Mark. Thanks.
Thank you. Rowel, anything else that you'd like to mention that we haven't touched on, but which you feel is important?
Yes, when we commenced our National IP Month, I lamented the sobering picture of our lack of progress in terms of the SDGs, not only in the Philippines, but also globally, because the deadline is near. It's just 6 years away, and I'm sure that we'll not be able to reach all those SDGs. But now more than ever is the best time to hit the call for the sustainable development. Echoing my message to our local media and your comment about the big companies, SDGs should not be just a part of a marketing ploy to attract customers and boost sales. It appears that some companies are making use of the ESG just to increase their sales. But we need to rethink how we choose our next ventures and redefine the meaning of innovation to serve populations. And we need more change makers, especially in intellectual property, on the side of social development and inclusive improvement of the quality of life of our people.
Well said. Well, on that note, Rowel Baba, thank you so much for joining us for the PitchMark World IP Day program. The Director General of the Intellectual Property Office of the Philippines, IPOPHIL, joining us from Manila.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.